what we're here to do today. We're part of AI4C, and we're going to be talking about the business case for AI. And we've got three great speakers today. Andrew Hubbard is joining us. He's CEO of AI London, which is an insure tech company, very socially responsible, award-winning. We also have Danielle Green. She's going to be speaking a little bit later. Danielle was, until recently, she was the chair and acting CEO of CETA. I don't know if people have come across that. CETA is a charity IT association, well worth looking up if you haven't done already. And then I'm very pleased to say that Jeff Balmont has joined us. He's MD of Kai Technology, which is a consultancy, but he's spent quite a long time leading the digital delivery for Missing People's chatbot. So we've got three people who to help guide us through the business case. But before we get started, as many of you will know, AI4C was created by the Worshipful Company of Information Technologists. And I'm absolutely delighted to say that Mark Holford, who is Master of WCIT, is going to kick off proceedings with just giving us a couple of minutes background on what WCIT does, so that I know some of our new charity members probably haven't come across livery companies before. So Mark is going to kick off the proceedings, and then we'll return for our speakers. So Mark, can I hand the floor over to you?
That's very kind. Thank you, Maxine. Perhaps some of our members might learn something as well. You never know, do you? Well, just to explain, Master basically means I'm the chair for a year. And I'm about halfway through my year because I started in October, perhaps a bit under. It's been, of course, an interesting year. The Worshipful Company of Information Technologists is a livery company, which in medieval times would have been the Guild. And in fact, the oldest livery company, which is the Weavers, can trace its origins back to the middle of the 12th century. We are rather more recent because you start by being a guild, which I think we became in 1987. Nick Birtles might correct me. And then we became a livery company in 1992. And we also got a royal charter in 2010. We are number 100, which in the sort of pecking order. And of course, if you're into binary, 100 is 4, which gives us a very rapid elevation. However, we're a membership organization. We have 800 members. And like all livery companies, we have 4 main pillars. One is, which is all really about support. The first of all is about supporting each other, and it's normally known as fellowship. And that provides a very important basis, for instance, for what we're doing today, because most of us have become friends, and therefore we are all happy to volunteer together. The next thing is to support our industry, the tech industry. The third pillar is about education. We support and help found one school, the Hammersmith Academy, alongside the Mercers. We co-founded this, and Nick Birtles is one of the governors, and he's here today. We also have a strong association with the Lillian Baylis Technology School in Vauxhall. And we do other things in education as well. For instance, a number of people here today, 2 weeks ago, gave a careers session, each talking about half an hour. 6 people talked about half an hour to all the schools that are within the ambit of the Haberdashers Livery Company. So there were 9 schools and 90 pupils. So that's another example of supporting education. And now I've lost my place. So here we are. And the fourth, and in a way perhaps most important, certainly from today's point of view, is about charity. And that's really about 2 things. One is about money. In 2019, which was an exceptional year, we gave away around £400,000. And the reason for that was really the basis for today's seminar, and that was the giving money to Missing People and Calm for their AI and machine learning initiatives. But an average year, we probably give away between £150,000 and £200,000. And some of that's ad hoc, but there is quite a lot that we give to strategic partners who we have worked with. And we call Missing People and Calm some of our strategic partners, because this support is ongoing. in the last year, the sources of money come from really two things, or two or three things. One is the members give on a regular basis, and that gives us an income with gift aid of just over £100,000. In addition, we have been collecting over the last year during lockdown people's cigarette money or tube money or whatever they've given, had not had to spend money on, and also people have supported events like this where they've attended or lectures by giving a donation, and that's raised us over £18,000, which I think is a quite staggering amount of money. And the last thing I just would like to talk briefly about is volunteering, because that is really a very important part of what we do, and many of our members do different sorts of volunteering. We have two sort of special initiatives. One is in the arts sector for IT for Arts, which supports arts organizations in doing workshops, in doing helping on individual projects. And then really AI4C, and that's we've been doing, by the way, for I think nearly 20 years. And AI4C there is modeled very much on that, on that model. And I think we may well be about to start a third one in a different sector shortly. So with those few thoughts, I'd like to pass you back, presumably to you, Maxine. I hope that's been helpful. If anybody wants to ask me a question, do either put it in the chat or ask at the end. I'm very happy to talk a bit more if you want to know more.
Thank you very much. Very illuminating. It's always good to.
Oh, you learned something.
Where the money. Thank you very much. So I shall return us back now to pick up on the business case for AI. And I know that a number of the charities gave us some input on the sort of topic area you'd like to cover and which aspects. And one of the key things was that you would like us to take you through a bit of the journey for a business case. So you wanted to get a good grip on all of the aspects of a business case and things to consider. And that's certainly something that I hope we're going to do today. And I also hope at the end of this, you're going to have some real practical advice from three people who I know have got some great experience to share with you and some really good understanding. So I'd like to start off, and I'm going to ask Andrew to kick us off as our first of our speakers.
Thank you so much for this invitation. I'm going to introduce quite a sort of formal process, which doesn't really fit with the almost Wild West situation which exists in artificial intelligence today, where there is so much being unearthed for the first time, so many people are learning new lessons, the machines themselves are taking us to places that we didn't really expect, and there are a whole bunch of concerns which you're going to hear about during today on things like the bias that is buried in the data and the misuse, the ability to unduly influence and so on from AI. But what I've done in response to Maxine's request is just highlight a very, as I said, fairly procedural routine for identifying the business case. It will look like any other process for developing a business case. So as we go through it, I'll try and pick out one or two areas where there's a twist because of the nature of AI and what it can do for us. The 5 steps that I'm going to introduce you to are needs, alignment, finance, test, and analyze. And I'll give you the heads up that when we get to the 5th step, I'll be cutting it short to hand over to Danielle, who is going to talk you through the risks, which is essentially what my analyze section does. So the first area is identifying a problem. My business provides AI use cases to the life pension and investment industry. And one of the challenges is so many people ask us really for projects that are about process automation or business intelligence. And I think the first area is, as it says here, to identify a problem that cannot be solved by conventional means. And by that, I mean better use of technology, process automation, digital channel, allowing your customers to deal with you through mobile or whatever. So where those do not give you the answer, and it's felt that an AI component can be implemented that will solve a specific problem. So I think one of the first areas that it's a real challenge for the charitable sector is because the lack of maturity in the AI space. There are very few readily available components, and this particular step looks for identifiable AI components that are available for reuse. A chatbot that AI4C and others have been involved in is a good example of a reusable component. But elsewhere, there's still a lot of work to be done about how sentiment analysis and the more predictive side of AI can be used. So the first area is, does the AI component that you've seen address a need that can't be solved through conventional needs? Second area, and again, with the experience I've had through WCIT with the charity sector, this is a really challenging problem, because charities, the last time I looked at the Charities Commission, there was something like 20,000, 30,000 charities. There are lots of charities. A few are very big and many are very small. So the idea that some charities have to worry about the alignment with a broader strategy will seem rather ridiculous. But you take the bigger charities, they really do have to consider how an AI component is going to align with the broader strategy of their engagement. Will it be appropriate to their stakeholders, whether those are the users of the service that the charity provides? Will it be appropriate to their moral and legal standing in terms of the use of data? So there are lots of areas that I think particularly Daniel will bring across in the risk area that need to be considered. But it is about looking at I'm being told by Gary Moore, there are 160,000 charities in the Charity Commission. So that's very useful. Okay, so moving on to the sort of subset of the AI component. I wanted to share this because I found this when I was doing my sort of training on AI. One of the most useful summaries of the predictive power. AI is about making better predictions. That's really the core of it. And it does it in three areas. It can help improve human judgment. In my arena of life and pensions and so on, it can help underwriters assess risk faster and assess risk with more reliable outcomes. It can, in actions, it can determine what the next best action is for somebody to take who might be, again, in my market, a financial advisor, to achieve an outcome given the circumstances of the person they're dealing with. And it has, of course, an astonishing ability to analyze data. You basically can have thousands of people looking at data 24/7 forever. So the ability for AI machines to go off and analyze data is one of its very powerful components. So a bit sidetracked there, but this is where the value comes from where AI can support human judgment, action, or data. The fourth step is this idea of testing the need. And here I've put in 5 little tests that I feel are very useful, that I picked up, one of the few valuable things I've ever got from Gartner, which is, who's the primary consumer going to be? I think this is a key one. Which business process will host the AI use case? So which, again, I'll give you the examples in my market of, if it's the underwriters, then the underwriters it has to be understood how they're going to use the data, how it's going to be presented to them, and what they're expected to do with it as the AI use case impacts them. This area of how the impact will be measured and with what evidence. I know certainly one of the charities I was a trustee at piloted a whole series, it was a sports charity, and it piloted a whole series of evidence-based outcomes to see what happened that was positive from youth engaging with the charity on 10-week programs. And I think that's a challenge, that you have to think, what's the impact how can it be measured that the AI component has made that impact to the charity's activities? And if it's a positive impact, how do you continue to measure it and how do you maintain it? I think that's another key component with that is certainly true of AI, that it, just as the models in its development need to be trained, they need to be maintained. And there needs to be a specialist resource, data scientist resource looking at that. And finally, who are the internal experts who are going to guide the AI initiative? A bit of AI jargon is supervised learning and unsupervised. I would suggest that many of the instances in the charity sector are going to be in the supervised learning, because you need to be able to audit the outcomes of the AI activity. You can't just say, oh, well, it decided to give that advice to that group of people and we've no idea why. I don't think the authorities would accept that. So you're going to need a lot of internal expertise to ensure that the algorithms and the outcomes that the AI engine creates are acceptable. At this point, I'm going to, the fifth step for me would be the analyzing from identifying the risks involved. But I think if I might, I'm going to hand over to Danielle, because I think that's a good segue into your section, if that's all right. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much there, Andrew. That was just brilliant, really interesting. And I just wanted to start with talking the very comprehensive and illuminating talk, and I will certainly take it from here. But anyway, just to recap, this is actually the fifth stage of making the business case, the analysis stage that Andrew touched on. So an overview that basically in identifying the risks, this, including ethical and legal concerns, this basically enables the organization to be proactive in its approach and actually make sure that it's really planning for the possible negative effects of the technology even before its implementation. Or rather, in another way, as we like to say, be prepared. I always kind of say expect the worst and hopefully you'll always be pleasantly surprised. So this is actually all about the risk elements and what could go wrong. I know that I'm following the elements about how to create a business case, and we'll certainly pass you on to Jeff, who will talk about the benefits of AI development. But in this case, I hope that I'm actually being more like belt and braces rather than doom and gloom. So let's start really with talking about how do you create a risk assessment for a business case, just one that isn't necessarily AI, and where do you start with it? So the first question is really, what are the risks involved? Then what are the consequences of these risks happening? Also, what are the opportunities that may emerge as a result of the risks? And what is your mitigation plan in place to deal with these risks? And also, every project should include a risk log. I cannot emphasize it enough. So going on then, what is actually an AI and ML business case like? Well, it's the same, but there are some unique issues. And these are the areas, data, technology, ethics, and legal and compliance, where I think they actually do differ the most. And this talk in itself is really to give you a steer in how to prepare for the unexpected. I'll be going through some of the questions that you should be asking in order to help you decide how to mitigate your risks and challenges. And though my purpose is really to highlight the areas of concern and not necessarily give you the answers, because those risks that you identify will actually be specific to your project, as will the solutions. But hopefully this will give you a good framework. So starting off with data. If you're undertaking any machine learning project, then it will be completely underpinned by your data. AI is only as good as the data it's trained with. So what does good data look like, and how do you spot the risks of bad data and suboptimal data quality? Well, firstly, if you're not collecting the right data for your purposes, how do you know that it's relevant? How do you know, for example, that do you need demographic data, but do you have age and gender? Is even whether you actually kind of collect that by putting it on a form. Is that data available elsewhere? Is your data reliable? Can you trust it? Have you got enough data to train your models? And actually that whole thing about sufficiency is really one of the reasons that at CETA we decided not to start going down the path of a machine learning project, because we didn't have enough data to manage it. Then also coherence and cleanliness, which is allegedly next to godliness, but here is also next to success. So what if your data isn't clean? What if it's incorrect or incomplete or duplicated? And don't forget that with the good old GDPR striking aspersions into everyone's hearts, that also includes what if your data is irrelevant or unnecessary? Some examples: are your addresses formatted correctly to give you geographical regions and the correct classifications? Are things even spelt correctly? Do you have data standards? And then going on to labeling, sorry, I've gone one over, but anyway, going on to labeling and classification. So is your data labeled, or do you need to complete an exercise in labeling and classifying? And are there any risks associated with that? For example, creating an effective syntax, or who's going to do it, or how and when it's going to be done, and the cost. Labeling is the process of detecting and tagging data samples. For example, if your model needs to perform sentiment analysis, as in a case where you need to detect whether someone's tone is sarcastic and you're working on audio files, then you'll need to label those audio files with a certain inflections. With consistency, it's think about the how and where your data is gathered. Is it consistent? What if there been a change in your data collection or content? For example, have you changed the name or the focus of your services, or have you even changed your initial client form? Is there equivalence in the data that's been gathered before and after the change? And is your data actually going to change after now? And so what's going to happen if you'll be using not the data that you've got now, but the data that you're going to have? Then there's also availability and accessibility, if I can manage my slides properly. So is your data actually available? So does it exist, and actually do you own it, or does it belong to another service provider? Is your data accessible? Where is it held? Do you need certain technology or platforms to access it? And do you have the people or skills to do so? And it's also another element is obviously the timeliness. What's your mitigation if you can't get the data you need at the right time to use it effectively? And then good old data security, anonymization and encryption. What happens if you need to encrypt your data, or maybe it's already encrypted and you need to unencrypt it to then move it over to a third-party platform? What are your security requirements about this? How are you going to anonymize your data to enable it to be used in your training models? You obviously can't use any personal data and any identifying data, but it could even include IP addresses. So things definitely to be aware of. Then moving on to technology, which is what it's all about really. But what are your technology risks here? So is the technology in your organization mature enough to support your solution? Does the solution sit with your current technology? Or actually, are you still on a technology journey when you need to go further down the path to develop where you are? With your solution, is it actually robust enough that it's future-proofed? Is it going to last for a long time, or is it quite short-term? What if it falls over or isn't supported, or its training models take it in a different direction? Will it also be enabled by future technology and future processes? And the other question, what about if your project doesn't integrate effectively with your staff, your processes, and your technology, both now and in the future? And are you going to need to retrain everyone or get new technology in? And of course, future proofing. What if the technology of your solution does not enable future technology and it doesn't enable future initiatives? Don't forget those. For example, with your supervised learning, the data is labeled to teach the model to label the data, which in turn leads to better machine learning, but you need to oversee it and correct it, as Andrew said. Then we're coming on to ethics, which is a major area of any AI development or projects, as you know. So the biggest question is really, does your development project actually fall inside or outside your ethical framework, including data collection of use as part of this project? And do you need to expand or even create a code of ethics to actually encompass AI? Here's a little question that no one really thinks about, but data mindfulness, very Zen, I know, but are you practicing it? So are you actually aware of what you're doing with your data and why? It's very much part of your ethics framework. In terms of your ethical output, do you understand regarding the output of your AI or machine learning, and namely, what happens if you can't rely on the judgments it will be making? Don't forget Microsoft's AI chatbot, which caused huge controversy when the bot itself was training on tweets, and it started to post inflammatory and offensive tweets through its Twitter account, which caused Microsoft to shut it down, and the whole service that had spent so long developing after, wait for it, a whole 16 hours after its launch. Though I don't think they really kind of did their risk log very effectively there. And also, have you actually defended your project against misuse? It's great if you can create simulations and predictions, for example, but then will this be used in industries outside of your ethical framework, for example, defense? And also bias, the big one, as Andrew also touched upon. What about any bias that your development project may create or indeed perpetuate? Because these biases are actually built into your data sets. So how will you know that your algorithm is biased? Now, how can you train it? And also, just to note, bad data in equals bad data out. So really, that's why assessing and mitigating your data risks are so important. So coming on to legal and compliance very quickly. So confidentiality, have you missed any confidentiality and data privacy requirements of your users, as well as actually developing your project? Can you keep confidentiality and safeguarding whilst analyzing the results and training the models, as well as your solution? Don't forget about data ownership, as we trust on. I know of one organization using a third party to provide some of its services, but they then discovered that the contract gave the third party ownership of the data associated with that service. If you're in that situation, do you pay for the data set? Do you go elsewhere? Are you able to do without? Don't forget our good old friend GDPR. Are you compliant? And are your data and AI aspirations legal? And with data security, are your people cleared to work with the data? Do you indeed make sure that it's encrypted effectively and anonymized, as we said? Right, coming over to operations and resources. Let's talk about the people involved with your project. So will your project actually result in staff changes? It's an interesting one to consider along with your processes. Do you have the skills in-house to manage and use the solution as well as create? And also throughout, we're going to see that there are risks associated with the maintenance and support as well as the initial development of your project, as we discussed. And does your charity have the learning capabilities for this project? Have you got the competent people to make the decisions? Also within this is the costs. Don't forget that actually really the costs, you've got the initial development as you go, but also there is the maintenance costs. I think as Maxine alluded to, they're hungry children that can consistently need feeding. Have you got the costs now? Have you got the money for any costs in the future? Do you actually know what this entails long term? Going then on to processes, and are they designed enough to facilitate what you've got? And also, if you are creating a chatbot to triage your initial client contact, then do you know what the processes are in order to outsource it to machine? Don't forget also that your processes include those from data collection. So how do you get good data from your processes? And have you appreciated the full impact of your processes and operations on this project? What happens if your project overruns? And also, what happens if the sequence of tasks is out of date? Of the original sequence. And with your procurement and suppliers, what happens if you need external vendors? What happens if, do you know that pro bono is appropriate, or do you need data security and resource requirements? And what happens if your software provider stops trading or seems to move outside the scope or provide you with technology you didn't expect or ask for? And this is where your risk log is most useful, because basically it will have everything documented that you can always come back to. And finally, does your data fit the scope, and how are you going to prevent it expanding from its scope? Is it scope appropriate? With the outcome, is it what's the quality of AI that you're expecting, and what's the risk that it's not attainable? And how will you know that your project is ready or finished, or will it ever be ready or finished? And what happens if it doesn't achieve your aims? What are your aims? And lastly, communication and language. So are your stakeholders ready for this change, especially despite what they say? Do you need to use non-technical language with them, or do you need to reduce the technical language your suppliers and people are using with you? And what happens if your stakeholders don't fully understand the impact, or do your stakeholders fully understand the opportunities? So I'm really hoping that this hasn't necessarily put you off. I've given you lots of scenarios and what ifs and not necessarily the answers, but that indeed will be part of it, the AI journey. And on the note of opportunities, I'm going to hand you over to Jeff, who's going to talk about those opportunities and the benefits of AI and indeed why it's worth it. Thank you so much for listening, for the opportunity to talk to you.
And before you start, Jeff, I just want to perhaps reassure people that what they've been listening to so far has provided, I hope you'll agree, from Andrew some great processes to follow, some simple steps. And then Danielle's followed it up with a really helpful, what I'd call a litmus test, the sort of questions that you need to ask yourself. And certainly the people that you're going to go to for funding will hope that you've asked, and they'll be so impressed if you've got the answers to those questions at your fingertips. But as Danielle said, it's not all the bad stuff. You know, we've covered all the worst case side of things to start with. And I'm really hoping that Jeff is going to come over the hill like the cavalry and give us some of the good news about what we can do with our business case.
So first of all, as Maxine said, brilliant stuff from Andrew and Danielle. I'm the now loose cannon who now gets to transpose all that hard work into how it applies to a charity and what you can expect. So I think one of the important things is to realise that it's not the uprising of Skynet. Charities can be, you tread a fine line when using AI, because charities are very humanised when you're looking for funding, support, etc., and also for your internal staff. So it's not after your job. Okay, charities, your most important resource, in my opinion and experience, is your people. Those who, the human to human help. So AI isn't there to take that away, and it's an important message to make sure that runs throughout your business case, your internal communication, when you're talking to funders. Make sure AI is connected to your cause. So in this day and age, a cause is something that people can be emotionally attached to. They can understand, they can want to champion. So example, if you give your AI as a, we want to help double the amount of people without doubling our frontline staff. It's a good KPI, it's good in a commercial sense, it's all those very important things, but it's quite cold. So link it into something. So we want to use AI to quickly and effectively service people by connecting them to the most relevant information, help or support, and ensuring that our most valuable resource, our people, can offer their expertise to those who need it the most. And Maxine will know from me, in terms of cause, emotional attachment, I love technology, but I don't have an emotional attachment to my technology. I have an emotional attachment to what that helps, what that provides, what that supports, enhances, and how it makes a difference. And it's important that that's captured in your business case and your communications, and when you're pitching to funders. It's also not a cure. Okay, so AI is going to help your cause, help your charity. It's not the be and end all. Okay, and it's important to remember that, particularly in terms of managing expectations of your board of trustees, or any funders indeed that give you support to make your program or your project become reality. Sustainability. Danielle's mentioned her hungry AI children, and you need to remember that when you're costing, when you're looking for your funding, when you're building that into your strategy, that you understand what this is going to cost above and beyond just implementing your AI. And it's something that's not always properly looked at. So can you monetize it? Commercializing something isn't a crime. Historically it's been frowned upon in the charity sector, but if you want your AI to be sustainable, to grow, to develop, to spring off into many different branches where it can help in other areas, you need to make sure you've carefully thought about this. There's a number of ways, and I'll sort of touch on those later on in the slides, but keep that in mind, that monetizing. So for example, public services. So I looked at a program of work in terms of where we had multiple cases of missing in let's say a police force, 358 instances in a year. Of those 358, 90% of those missing cases related to 2 young people. When we went in and did return to home interviews, which we did in place of the police and social services, because as a charity, those young people were more willing to talk to us, and it was a service we provided. We looked at it and went, in those return to home interviews, can we look at establishing through AI machine learning module, identify those young people that are likely to be repeat missing people? How can we accurately look at that? And obviously there's a lot of testing, and this was very conceptualized. But on the basis of that, we estimated we could save one police force £30 million a year if our model provided successful. That's a huge saving. That's something you can monetize. You can monetize your AI service in that way. It makes it sustainable. You're saving the public purse, but you're also providing a fantastic service, better than it can be done by those public service providers. Society benefit. The wider benefit to society that your AI program or project could potentially provide, that might make it with, again, saving the public purse, helping public services that are massively underfunding, where you can set in, make your AI program a sustainable service, but actually overall you are saving the public money. Can you work with other charities? And I'll touch on this again. So you need to be very, very clear when you're doing your business case and when you're doing your funding applications of how it benefits wider than necessarily your initial focus. Releasing your most powerful resources. Again, people, that's what I say. It's always the people are the most powerful resource you have, and look at how AI is going to release that resource. Particularly on sort of RPA, where you're automating your processes that require a lot of manual admin, that can provide a real powerful demonstration to funders in particular. The last thing is you're going to fail. Before we go on to this slide, sorry, you are going to fail. So your first run-throughs with your learning modules will return failure. That's how we learn. Then an AI and machine learning module is no different. You learn from your failures, you build up a better picture. Don't expect your AI project, when you're doing your business case, to have a very finite cost of going, right, when we've done that, we've hit the gold standard. You're going to have iterations of how that learning goes, which may require more data, more testing, more data scientists looking into that module and adjusting it. Please don't just think you're going to get to one stop point and everything is going to be fantastic. It is a very iterative approach when you're looking at AI solutions. But reach out, you're not on your own. Collaborate, and that can be with a myriad of different organizations or groups of people. Open source. Can you provide one of the funding applications from a couple of years ago? One of the big things was those charities looking for funding that could provide some sort of open source capability were deemed a much more attractive proposition to that funder, because obviously for them, their legacy is that this goes out and extends beyond that charity, wider into society, into other charitable areas. So think, if you're designing something and you're building something, can that be reutilized? Can you share that with other organizations? WCIT, fantastic for their support, their help. Some brilliant minds and some incredibly willing people offer expertise, introductions. You know, use these when you're looking at your AI program of work. Obviously, corporations. Every corporation loves to, and I'll choose my words carefully here, loves to contribute and improve their profile within society, especially in their local areas. Use that to your advantage. If you provide them the AI, and as I said before, it's cold, it's factual, it's KPIs, those are important measures for outcomes of success. If you're going to a corporation looking for them to give you funding, looking to them to work with you, you need that emotional attachment. You know, we can service twice as many people. Can you convert that into how many lives you can impact, how many lives you can save? That very important metrics for a corporation. Academia. I mean, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, someone, when I spoke to Ideal in London, I think London is identified as one of the key hotspots of AI capability in terms of academia, data scientists in the world. There's a vast array of these coming through colleges and universities. They need case studies. They need to be working in environments where they can demonstrate their capabilities and work. This is where you can get very, very cost-effective resources involved in your programs with high levels of expertise, and they have access to other technologies that you may not. Other charities. So, for example, at Missing People, lots of people coming through to us. What is the underlying cause for someone wanting to go missing or feeling the need to go missing? Mental health, domestic abuse, county line drug gangs, all these type of things. How could you get other charities involved in your program of work, or at the end of your program of work, potentially a client? And I use that term quite lightly, client, because you look at them as a partner or cooperation. They might want to pay you for your service, or they may help you fund your growth by plugging in. So for our example of chatbot triaging people as they come through, can it identify if there's other better charities suited to dealing with their issue? And again, this isn't about technology replacing human interaction. This is getting those people who need that help to the right person as quickly as possible. It's very attractive, especially if other charities can build and cooperate with work that you've already undertaken. And don't reinvent the wheel. Can the technology you need to use, can AI capability in some form or another exist somewhere else, and you can utilize that for your benefit? Cheaper, quicker, more reliable, more robust, but be aware of those suppliers who promise you the world. And I think someone, you know, you have to be careful that you don't get stuck with a supplier that's telling you they can do something when they can't. So make sure you go into the background and check with them. The unexpected. AI will no doubt throw you the few odd curveballs. Some of those can be really beneficial. So unexpected results. So we found that with our chatbot, young people were much more willing to converse with a chatbot, and were probably a little bit too willing to provide personal information when dealing with a chatbot. In their opinion, as we did our study and questionnaires, it appeared to us that the young people felt the chatbot was more confidential, that they could trust it not to call the police, they could trust it not to interfere or call their parents. An unexpected result we didn't think would happen, or we weren't even looking for. There are easy wins. Your program can be quite a long program, potentially can have a very big bang objective at the end, look for those little wins as you go along. Is there anything you're seeing? Is there any patterns that are emerging? Extended benefits. So our chatbot, we looked at, could it then monitor our online communities and alert us if there was unsuitable language that was being used, if there was arguments occurring in those communities between families we were trying to support, rather than having to have an individual sat on there all the time. They can be actually providing support to people who need it. The chatbot could sit there and monitor it, and that came out of the back of our original chatbot. The Internet of Things, it's there. It's a train that's already left the station. Get on it. It's going at a good place. Alexa, smart homes. So if you're an environmental charity, could you link up with smart meters? And if you help them save money on their electric bill, which is helping save the planet, can you get them to charitably donate for every £1 you save them 20 pence? But you can automate that. You can get it connected to their homes. You can show them how it's being done. Taking donations to Alexa, social media, the good and evil of social media, very yin and yang. However, the power of globalized connectivity is huge on social media. How can you leverage that? How can that be something that your AI can expand into, even if you're not originally thinking it could? The human issue, again, although it's not trying to replace humans can be just as detrimental to your AI as it could be a benefit. But first of all, let's consider those that you're helping. Socioeconomic barriers. Who's connected, who isn't? The elderly community. Are they so adept at using smart devices as the youth? You need to make sure you consider this. Don't isolate your people who need to use your service and need your help by making AI become a barrier. So that's very important. Gender bias and racial AI profiling. I love a bit of bias talk about AI, and I'm really glad Danielle brought that up. That's huge. It's, data again. If your data is biased, how do you know? It's a big subject, and I'll be happy to talk to people separately. But everyone, Daniel and Andrew were good on their timekeeping, on notoriously bad. And if I stick on this project, we'll be here for about 3 days. So happy to talk about it, but you need to take that seriously. Humanizing. Again, humanizing your interaction with the data. So when you're setting up your data act, where you get your data from, your labeling, your classifications, human bias can feed into that without you even realizing. So you need to be able to make sure you've got an effective full loop check on what is being done and how it's being done. Test. Stakeholders, unintelligent AI. It's not the brightest thing at the moment. It does some clever stuff. But again, be careful that you're not doing a program that is actually quite unintelligent AI, or not an effective use of it. RPA, that's great. That can be some of your low-level wins, really can. And it needs to be carefully considered either as your main aim or part of your AI program. Failure is progress. I've said it before. Don't be afraid if your first set of results don't come out how you want. This is the feedback loop into your AI. This is your learning process. So make sure you build in and bake in time into your program timeline that allows for this to happen. Managing the expectations of your stakeholders and your funders. As I said before, it's not the golden ticket, it's not the silver bullet. I could think of a load of other cheesy analogies, but I won't. But you need to be careful that you manage those and they understand what they are going to get from this program. Data privacy, and again, Danielle's covered that beautifully earlier. You really must ensure that you're au fait with that and you're considering it along with ethics. Now, my particular viewpoint on this is commercial organisations have been doing this for a while, adverts on Facebook. You know, we looked at sentimental analysis. Could you identify someone that goes missing, that is likely to go missing before they go missing? Big ethics and data issue around that. However, go to those organisations that do it the best and see how they've, I wouldn't say got round those requirements, but how do they traverse that landscape, and how could you apply it to helping people? People are happy to be adverts to come up on their screen, come up on their Facebook, come up on their social media feeds. Why should helping people be any different? It's far more valuable than showing me the latest vacuum cleaner because I looked at a vacuum cleaner advert on another website. This is about helping people. So don't be afraid and don't let that block you, but you need to make sure you consider it properly, but go and seek expertise from those who do it best, not necessarily those who do it best in the charity sector, those who do it best, full stop. But again, there's a few topics in there that I'm not able to go into in depth, but I'm happy to talk to people about that. Thank you all for listening.
Thanks very much, Jeff. That was, I hope people agree that one of the things you did so well there was make us think about the extra benefits that an AI business case could be addressing, and some of the places that if you kind of widen your thoughts about what it's delivering, you might have some more funding opportunities to back what it is that you're trying to achieve. And I really like the way that both Jeff and Danielle gave us good cause for thinking that failure can be good. So that was very heartening. Now, I don't know if you've had a look at the chat line, and you may well have some questions in the back of your mind, but just to tell you some of the couple of questions that have been going on in the background. Chris Rees very rightly told us that there are quite a few ethical framework there. If you think that your charity organisation could do with one, then you don't need to go to all of the expense of creating one from the ground up. There are lots of them out there. I might ask Chris, I might put him on the spot at some point and say, if he's got any thoughts of a good few that we could look at, that would be very helpful. And also, thinking about the BCS, Chris is a past president of the BCS, but I hear that there was a really good talk just before this event, one of the Turin talks, that seems to be very relevant to what we're talking about. So again, I'll follow up with that to all the members so that we give you some kind of link in to hear what was going on there. Richard very kindly drew attention to something that we could use for helping us with the business case, and that's to look at organisations' maturity on the TRL level, which is your technology readiness. It helps you look at your organisation to see how mature you are, and perhaps steps that you go through to either improve that, or at least if you understand where you are, when you start talking to suppliers, you can understand whether your language is actually meeting or whether you've got a big gap, just because they don't understand where you are in terms of being technology ready. But also Jeff mentioned RPA, which for those of you who don't know, is robotic process automation. And it's certainly a topic that we may well come back to in AI4C and do a little mini workshop on, because it's quite a complex topic and there's all sorts of things that we could cover on.
Actually, just to say, there are also risk logs available on the internet, which give you a framework for setting out your risks, scoring those, and then doing the same for the mitigation that you put against each risk. Absolutely,
good point. We can send you some links to some good ones that we know of, some that we know and recommend. So, and Richard, I'm probably going to let you ask that question yourself, because your question was really about whether there are some other tips that people could use to help facilitate their better understanding of each other. So if you've got a question chat so far, please stick your paw up, unmute or dive in.
That's right, Maxine. AI is sort of famous for hype, isn't it? You know, and it shouldn't be really, but it is. And sometimes it can be the case that your contractor is thinking that you're prepared to buy a really high risk research project, and actually you want something that just works. So that was my comment about TRL. But the panel are very experienced, and they probably have lots of suggestions for dealing with this sort of terrible business of AI hype, which can be very expensive to small businesses if they fall for it.
Richard, in the slides that I've created as a backup slide, I've got the infamous Gartner hype evolution,
the hype cycle.
Yeah. The hype cycle, that's it.
Yeah.
I think what shocked me when I saw it, because they're one of the many organizations that are going, oh, it's really important, you've got to spend money with us and many others getting into it, was how few technologies were anywhere near steady state reusability.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a good one. Reusability, right? That's
well,
a really good
reusability, one. But I think the hype cycle it would be a useful device to show people, if you're using this type of AI, it's still experimental. It's not got to a steady state.
Yeah.
It's not reusable. I think the other dynamic is that because so many charities, and Gary very rightly reminded me there are 130,000, I left 100,000 off when I came to the number of charities. So most of them are tiny, and they need really reliable, reusable components. And that's not, they don't exist in AI. So I think one of the dynamics certainly that Maxine and I and the other presenters have mulled over is, we're actually at a stage where we should be thinking about, what do we do to create an environment where the funding available from government and the charity sector drives reusability of AI components. And that needs to be both encouraged but also controlled, so that those are genuinely the most applicable to the broadest number. And a chatbot is a great example, but there'll be others in terms of sentiment analysis and so on. And I think that's our challenge as an organization, perhaps as WCIT, is how it helps, as I mentioned earlier, change from bring some law enforcement to the Wild West. It's that's the challenge we've got. So I think, Richard, my worry is small charities really should, I would advise, don't engage in this yet. It's not.
Yeah. So Andrew, I was wondering,
swallowed up.
my rule of thumb was, I mean, I'm a professor of computer science, right? So it doesn't matter for me. I don't have any, if something goes wrong, well, that's really interesting. I rub my hands, that's great. But maybe the question is, can I buy this off the shelf? And can you show me this running off the shelf? And if you can't, we shouldn't be procuring it. But does that just eliminate loads and loads of really good stuff? That's my question.
No, because if it's good, it's reusable. It doesn't eliminate the good stuff, but it does eliminate a lot of project disasters, which I think, I feel the biggest challenge for us at the moment is to kind of stop lots of charities thinking, buying the hype. That's really the challenge they face. Don't buy the hype.
Yeah, I mean, from echoing a lot of what Andrew said there, in terms of some practical steps maybe you can do if you're looking into it, is check out their reputation, reference sites, customers, etc. That's all well and good. The flip side is, don't dismiss the startups and the new disruptors, who can sometimes be a lot more agile and a lot more cost effective in terms of what you're looking for, however can carry a higher risk in terms of their commercial stability. I think trusted bodies are a little bit difficult at the moment. As you said, it's a little bit Wild West out there. So in terms of that regulation, I think that's a little difficult. Share as much of the risk as you can with them commercially. If they're a good supplier and they want to be a partner with the charity, and for whether they're a startup or they're an established, see if you can share that commercial risk with them in many different ways, stagger your payments in terms of deliverables, culture, you know, also asked to look at their financial books. How have they grown? How have they sourced their income? Where are they getting that from? As Andrew said, if you know, if they've got repeatable customers who've extended contracts with them, customers who've bought more of them, where is their growth coming from? And culturally, you know, do they understand your charity? Have they done their homework? If they're quick to come in and sell, and they're all they talk about is AI and how wonderful it is, where are they looking at your charity? Where are they looking? What have they given of examples of, oh, our AI technology is great for this, this, and this? How does that translate to you? How does that translate to your service users? If they can't give you that, or they haven't given you that, the likelihood is they're probably trying to sell you something you don't need or won't be able to use.
I think it's actually just jumping in there. I think it's completely what Jeff says, that actually it's, and following on from Richard's comment about real world examples, it's basically actually, can they walk through your processes and tell you exactly what an AI project would look like? What benefit would you get? And actually, what does it look like in the context of what you actually do? So rather than, yes, this amazing kind of everything that is potential, it's really in practice, in a year's time, what can you expect to see? And actually, you know, be quite definite about it. And obviously that will change over time. And, you know, this is just in the planning, but it's really, I think, to ensure that they understand what your organization does and that you can actually understand what they're going to provide for you, rather than, so the practical rather than the theoretical.
One more thing to add. So as part of the massive digital transformation piece we did at Missing People, we had this great chatbot, but we also needed to change our case management system. Very, very yawn, boring to all the funders. You want a CRM. It wasn't. We were doing far more than that. That's a business case issue for CRMs. However, one of the providers of the CRM, one of their biggest differences was their cultural alignment to the charity. So they came in and did their proposal. They understood the AI piece that we were working on with the chatbot and how that would interact. They showed us some very, very smart examples of how to better our processes, exactly what Danielle said there. However, also within their proposal was, at the end of it, they offered to give us £30,000 worth, I think it was, of resource per annum towards AI R&D. So they were very, very much aligned to us, and they weren't the people providing us the AI. Don't get me wrong, they were doing some very, very smart stuff, but that was a real commitment shown to us as a partnership of a sort of, not a cashback, but it was, we believe in your charity, we want to be a partner with your charity. You know, it was good for them, corporate social responsibility, all that kind of stuff. You know, we live in a commercial world. I'm fine with dealing with people who are upfront. But the fact they were offering us money or resource equivalents to look into R&D for AI felt very, very good fit with us. And I know this isn't exactly related to that, making sure you get the right AI partner, but that type of display of cultural alignment and willingness to share some risk with the charity was a real positive for us. I'm going to go on mute now before I take over.
Thanks very much, Jeff. That was a good point. And I'm sure we're going to hear more about that kind of thing when we have our event on procurement of AI and how to choose the right supplier and then how to manage them. But I noticed that Andy Phillips has popped in a couple of useful things in the chat box line. One is a report on AI readiness, which is unraveling some of the hype behind that. And he's also made some other good points. I don't know whether, Andy, whether you're in a place where you can't speak, which is why you've kind of chatted, but they're useful for people if you haven't had a look. And I'm going to ask Andrew if he'd mind sharing his wonderful curve, if that's something we could send out to the team separately on the hype curve, because that, I know it's quite an interesting one to have a look at. But it could keep you awake nights if you're already on the curve. Anybody else got a nice question for us or something they'd like to add?
Yes. I'm not totally convinced by Andrew's argument that if it's not reusable, you shouldn't touch it. in this sense, I don't think AI is any different from traditional IT. And going back 50 years, there was always a difference between building a system and building a product. If a client came to us, I was a Logico for many years, a client came to us and said, we want this system built to our specification, then we would do that if we could. And there was no expectation that it could be reused. It needed to be maintainable, of course, but not necessarily flogged to somebody else. If you're building a product, that's a whole different ballgame. And you have to think much harder about the components and how they're going to be reused and when and who by. And I suggest that the same applies in AI. I don't see why it's different. So if the benefit to your charity is enough, you might want to do something bespoke. If you're small, that would be pretty dangerous. But I'm not saying you shouldn't go for a product, by all means do.
Chris, my comments were only in the small charity sector. The bigger charities have more than capability to engage with reputable businesses like Logica and spend hundreds of millions building something. But with 130,000 charities in the UK, the vast majority are not of a scale to engage with what you described. So I completely agree. And there's the glorious 12 in the charity sector who have very deep pockets, still need to manage the money carefully, but can think about tendering and building this stuff. But the majority of charities are not in a position to manage that sort of, they're going to be, they won't have the resources in-house to handle it. Yeah,
that's probably true.
And also, if I could interject there, with AI4C, we had a great demonstration at our last workshop from a smaller charity who, because they're smaller, they're able to be agile enough to do something very niche that will work for them. And I think that there are a couple of charities who are making very good strides in those areas as well. So there's all kind of grounds here. So it's probably about knowing when it's a good time. When is it a good time to collaborate? I think that a few of the charities are already thinking about getting together to do something together. When you want to go on your own because you're really big or because you're really small. There's a bit of horses for courses there. So lots of different schools of thought, which is good to hear from. Let's have a look. Anything else that anybody else wants to raise?
Actually, going back, as Chris has took us back to, the computer industry is actually littered with ideas that people spent millions on, which actually were pretty stupid. The IBM's CRAM device, does anybody remember that? Card random access device.
I installed one once.
Nobody seems, I mean, they spent huge amounts of engineering talent on a device that was never, ever going to last the pace. So what I would observe is it's very important to actually have really robust checkpoints so that you can actually look back on what you've done in an independent manner and actually say, is this really a good idea? Or should we stop now and rethink it? I mean, if you look at the long dead now Microsoft project framework, everything had to be, every checkpoint, there was a checkpoint every 100 days. Every 100 days you had a deliverable where the team actually decided, is this going the way we thought it was going, or should we stop here and realize that the premise upon which it was founded wasn't a good one?
Well, you know, Jerry, you could have written my end pulling this all together speech for me.
Sorry about that.
I think it's a really good points there that with all projects, whether you're writing the business case or you're on the trail of actually doing the development, it's good to put those checkpoints in. To just put some signposts in so you actually get some real deliverables, but also so that you can do that test and say, are we still on the path we thought we were on? Is it still going to do what we want? Have we got something we can implement now and actually get some benefit out of? And I'm hoping that all the things that you've heard today will actually help you pull those kind of ideas together and help you flesh out your business case. And I'm sure in our AI4C workshops, we'll have many more discussions on this topic. But one of the things I quite like about projects is I quite like delivering early. So I'm really pleased to say that looks like that we're coming to the end of this, and we're not only on schedule, we're coming in a little bit under budget and under time, which is always a good thing for me. So I'd really like to thank you all for your time today. I'd like to thank our speakers. So a big thank you to Andrew and Danielle and to Jeff, and also a big thank you to the master, to Mark Holford, for coming along and saying a few words. So without further ado, unless Mark wants to add something.
Yeah, I just want to add my thanks. And I also wanted to thank our professor, Richard Harvey, for coming along today. He is the Gresham College Professor of IT, which we support. And it's really nice to see him with us today. So thank you, Richard. So anyway, thank you everybody for coming. I don't think actually I welcomed everybody. So it's hello, goodbye. And thank you for coming.
Thank you all very much and have a pleasant evening.